Her car was still running. That's the part no one in Bardstown can forget, because everything else about that night doesn't make sense. On a stretch of Kentucky highway, in the dark, in the summer heat, Crystal Rogers' red Chevrolet Impala sat abandoned on the side of the Bluegrass Parkway, engine on, hazard lights blinking, keys in the ignition, her purse on the seat, her phone, her whole life just sitting there, untouched, like she had stepped out for a moment and was about to come back. She never came back. Crystal Rogers was 35 years old, a mother of 5 children. She had kissed those kids and put them to bed. She had a life. She had people who needed her. And somewhere between the night of July 3rd, 2015, and the moment her mother reported her missing 2 days later, someone took her. Not a stranger. Not a random act of violence on a dark Kentucky road. Someone who knew exactly where she was. Someone who had planned it. Someone who had paid for it. And someone who, for nearly 10 years, sat across from her family at community events, walked free through the streets of Bardstown, and said nothing. And here is what makes this case one of the most disturbing, most chilling, most deeply corrupt true crime stories in modern American history. The man police suspected from day one, the man Crystal's own mother looked in the eyes and said, "I think you did something to my daughter," was her boyfriend, the father of her youngest child. The man sleeping in her bed the night she disappeared. His name is Brooks Houck. And the police officer who called Brooks mid-interrogation and told him to stop talking was Brooks's own brother, a sworn officer of the Bardstown Police Department, a man paid by the public to find the truth. When Crystal Rogers' father started getting too close to that truth, he was shot dead in a field while hunting with his 11-year-old grandson. Her body has never been found, but the signals were always there. Bardstown was sending them out for years. Today we're going to Bardstown, Kentucky, where the bourbon flows, the secrets run deep, and one woman's disappearance ripped an entire town apart at the seams. Bardstown, Kentucky looks like the kind of place where nothing bad is supposed to happen. It sits in the heart of the bluegrass region, rolling green hills, white fence lines, the slow rhythm of small-town life. They call it the bourbon capital of the world. Tourists come for the distilleries, the festivals, the charm. It's the kind of town where everyone knows everyone, where you wave at your neighbors, where people leave their doors unlocked. It's also the kind of town where everyone knows what everyone else is doing. And sometimes, that's the most dangerous thing of all. Crystal Maria Rogers grew up in this world. She was 35 years old in the summer of 2015. A young woman with deep roots in Bardstown, 5 children who adored her, and a life that revolved entirely around them. People who knew Crystal described her the same way. Over and over, she was a mother first. Everything else came second. She was warm. She was present. She was the kind of woman who showed up. At the time of her disappearance, Crystal was living with her boyfriend, Brooks Houck. They had a 2-year-old son together, a little boy named Eli. Crystal also had 4 other children from a previous relationship, all of them living in that home. It was a full house, a loud house, a house that ran on Crystal's energy. Brooks Houck, 34 at the time, came from one of Bardstown's well-known families. His brother, Nick Houck, was a serving officer with the Bardstown Police Department. The Houcks had roots in construction. They had connections. In a small town, that kind of family name carries weight. Crystal's family, her parents, Tommy and Sherry Ballard, her siblings, they knew about the relationship. They were watching it, and some of them had concerns. Because behind the surface of that life together, something was wrong. Court documents later revealed that Brooks Houck had been telling people the relationship was troubled, that he didn't want to share custody of Eli, that he didn't want to pay child support. One witness would later tell investigators that Brooks Houck had made his feelings about Crystal very clear. He wanted her gone, not separated, not co-parenting from a distance. Gone. July 3rd, 2015, the night before the 4th of July. Crystal Rogers was last seen alive at the home she shared with Brooks Houck in Bardstown. Brooks would later tell investigators that when he went to bed that night, Crystal was still up, sitting on her phone, playing games. That was the last image he offered the world of the woman he claimed to love. She was on her phone, playing games. By July 5th, 2 days later, Crystal's mother, Sherry Ballard, reported her daughter missing. Crystal had not shown up, had not called, had not reached out to her children. That was not Crystal. That was not who she was. Law enforcement began searching, and what they found on the Bluegrass Parkway, not far from Bardstown, made their blood run cold. Crystal's red Chevrolet Impala, sitting on the shoulder of the highway, engine still running, hazard lights blinking in the dark like a cry for help that no one had answered. Inside the car, her purse, her keys, her personal phone, everything was there, except Crystal. There were no signs of a struggle inside the vehicle, no blood, no forced entry, nothing to suggest that whatever happened to Crystal Rogers happened inside that car, which meant she either got out willingly or someone made her get out, and whoever was there with her that night left no trace of themselves behind. No witnesses came forward. No one reported seeing anything on that stretch of highway. The night had simply swallowed Crystal Rogers whole and spat out nothing but her car and her silence. Crystal's family did not wait for answers to come to them. Tommy Ballard, Crystal's father, a broad-shouldered, quietly determined man who loved his daughter with everything he had, immediately began his own investigation. He made calls. He knocked on doors. He pushed law enforcement harder than they were comfortable being pushed. He was not the kind of man who would sit down and grieve quietly while someone walked free. He would pay for that determination with his life, but we'll get to that. Within days of Crystal's disappearance, the family made no secret of who they suspected. Brooks Houck, Crystal's mother, Sherry, sat across from investigators and said it plainly. "I specifically told him, I think you did something to my daughter. I made that very clear." On July 8th, 5 days after Crystal vanished, Brooks Houck was brought in for questioning by the Nelson County Sheriff's Office. What happened during that interrogation is one of the most disturbing details in a case full of disturbing details. Mid-interview, Brooks Houck's phone rang. It was his brother, Nick Houck, Bardstown police officer Nick Houck, calling his brother in the middle of a murder interrogation to tell him to stop talking to police. Let that land for a moment. A law enforcement officer, someone sworn to protect the public, to pursue the truth, to serve justice, calling the prime suspect in his girlfriend's disappearance to shut down the investigation before it could begin. Nick Houck was called before a grand jury the following day. He agreed, eventually, to a polygraph test. When the results came back, the examiner flagged them as deeply concerning. In October 2015, 3 months after Crystal disappeared, Nick Houck was fired from the Bardstown Police Department. The police chief at the time, Rick McCubbin, didn't mince words. He said firing Nick Houck was one of the best decisions he made in his 35-year career. Brooks Houck was officially named a suspect that same month, but no charges were filed. No arrest was made. And in a town of just over 13,000 people, the man most believed responsible for Crystal Rogers' disappearance continued to live his life, continued to breathe free air, continued to raise the son he had shared with the woman he allegedly had killed. For Crystal's family, that was its own kind of torture. Before we go any further, I need you to do something for me right now. If this story is hitting you, if the weight of what Crystal's family carried is landing on you the way it should, hit that subscribe button. Leave a comment below. Tell me what you think about what Nick Houck did in that interrogation room. Tell me what you think justice looks like in a town like Bardstown. Because this channel exists to make sure that stories like Crystal's don't disappear the way she did, that the signals don't go quiet, that the people who deserve to be remembered are remembered. Share this video with one person tonight, because one more person watching means one more voice saying Crystal's name. We're not done yet, because Bardstown wasn't done either. And what happened next, 16 months after Crystal vanished, is the moment this case turned from a tragedy into something far darker. November 19th, 2016. Tommy Ballard, Crystal's father, the man who had spent 16 months pushing, searching, demanding answers about his daughter, took his 11-year-old grandson hunting on family property in Bardstown. It was a normal morning. A grandfather and his grandson out in the fields. doing the kind of quiet thing families do together. And then someone shot Tommy Ballard in the chest. The shooter was never seen. No suspect was ever charged. Tommy Ballard, the man who had been getting closest to the truth about what happened to Crystal, was dead. Crystal's mother, Sherry, did not hesitate in her belief. She told anyone who would listen they killed him because he was getting too close. Because Tommy Ballard was not a man who was going to stop. And somebody, somewhere, needed him to stop. Investigators later revealed something that made the connection impossible to ignore. The weapon believed to have been used to kill Tommy Ballard, prosecutors traced its purchase to a man who had sold it under a false name. That man was Nick Houck, Brooks Houck's brother, the former Bardstown police officer who had already been fired for interfering in Crystal's investigation. Nick Houck has never been charged with Tommy Ballard's murder. He has denied any involvement. The case remains officially unsolved. But the picture being painted of Bardstown, Kentucky, this quiet, charming, bourbon-soaked small town, was becoming something else entirely. A cluster of violence so concentrated, so connected, so systematically terrifying that the FBI eventually had to step in. Because Crystal Rogers and Tommy Ballard weren't the only ones. In 2013, 2 years before Crystal disappeared, Bardstown police officer Jason Ellis was driving home after his shift. Someone had placed branches across the road on the Bluegrass Parkway. When Jason stopped his car to clear them, he was ambushed, shot multiple times with a shotgun, killed on the side of the road in the dark. Whoever placed those branches knew he would stop, knew he would get out of that car, knew exactly what they were doing. Jason Ellis's murder has never been solved. In 2014, 1 year before Crystal disappeared, a woman named Kathy Netherland and her adult daughter Samantha were found brutally murdered in their home just outside Bardstown. That case has never been solved either. 4 cases, 1 small Kentucky town, a police department with a corruption problem so severe that a serving officer was fired for interfering in a murder investigation. Bardstown wasn't just haunted by Crystal Rogers. Bardstown was bleeding. The FBI took over Crystal's case and conducted 2 massive searches of Bardstown, once in 2020 and again in 2021. During the second search, agents descended on a residential subdivision, a neighborhood built by Brooks Houck's construction company, constructed in the months immediately following Crystal's disappearance. They were looking for something specific, and when they were done, they announced that an item of interest had been recovered from concrete at one of the homes. They said nothing more. They released no details, but the implication hung over Bardstown like a storm that wouldn't break. Had Crystal Rogers been buried in concrete, in a home that Brooks Houck had built, in a neighborhood that had gone up almost immediately after she vanished? Her body has still never been found. That question has never been officially answered. But the FBI also said something else during that 2021 search. They stated publicly on the record that there are people in Bardstown who know what happened to Crystal Rogers. People who have stayed silent. People who chose to protect someone over telling the truth. They said it was time for those people to come forward. Some of them never did. The wheels of justice in Bardstown moved slowly, agonizingly slowly. For Crystal's children who grew up without their mother. For Sherry Ballard, who lost both her daughter and her husband. For Eli Crystal and Brooks's little boy, who grew up going to court appearances for his father's trial until a judge looked out at the gallery, saw a child who had no idea his father was on trial for murdering his mother, and banned him from the courtroom. In September 2023, 8 years after Crystal disappeared, a grand jury indicted a local man named Joseph Lawson on charges of conspiracy to commit murder and tampering with evidence. Joseph's father, Steve Lawson, was arrested and charged with the same crimes shortly after. And then finally, Brooks Houck himself was indicted, charged with murder. The man Crystal's family had pointed at from day one was finally in handcuffs. In May 2025, nearly 10 years after Crystal vanished, Steve Lawson stood trial first. Prosecutors presented evidence that Houck had approached Steve Lawson and asked him to help get rid of Crystal. Asked him if he knew someone who could do it. Offered construction work as payment. Steve Lawson was found guilty. 17 years. In July 2025, Brooks Houck went to trial. The prosecution had no body, no crime scene, no murder weapon. What they had was a mountain of circumstantial evidence, phone records, witness testimony, DNA hairs found in cars, a flat tire on the Bluegrass Parkway that placed a Lawson vehicle at the scene, a phone call that put the whole conspiracy together. The jury deliberated, and then they came back. Guilty. Brooks Houck was convicted of the murder of Crystal Rogers. In September 2025, he was sentenced to life in prison. Crystal's family filled that courtroom. A family that had buried a father, raised children without a mother, fought for a decade against silence and corruption, and a small town that had tried to close ranks and protect its own. When the verdict came in, Crystal's daughter, who had been 11 years old when her mother disappeared, wept in the courtroom. She was a grown woman now, and she had waited her entire adolescence and young adulthood for this moment. She got it. But Crystal Rogers is still out there somewhere, in a field, in the earth, in concrete, somewhere in Kentucky. A mother of 5 is waiting to be brought home. And that chapter is not finished. Crystal Rogers never got to see her children grow up. She never got to hold her grandchildren. She never got to know who Eli became, the little boy whose father took his mother away from him before he was old enough to understand what that meant. She was 35 years old. 35. With everything in front of her. And someone decided that her life, her love, her presence, her laughter, her children who needed her every single day, that all of it was worth less than a child support payment, less than a custody arrangement, less than the inconvenience of loving someone. Crystal's family refused to let her become a cold case. They pushed when law enforcement didn't listen. They buried a husband and father and kept pushing. They sat through 10 years of hearings, delays, sealed documents, appeals, and silence, and they kept going. That is what love looks like. When the worst thing imaginable happens to it, it keeps going. In 2026, Kentucky lawmakers passed the Crystal Rogers Act legislation, reforming grand jury transparency and evidence disclosure, inspired directly by the failures and controversies that surrounded her case. Crystal Rogers changed Kentucky law. Even in her absence, she changed something. If this story moved you, and I know it did, please subscribe right now. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a signal. Drop a comment below. Tell me what you think should happen to Nick Houck. Tell me what justice looks like in a town that tried to bury its own truth. Share this video, because Crystal Rogers' name deserves to travel further than Bardstown, Kentucky ever let it. We have more true crime stories coming. More cases, more stories, told the way they deserve to be told, with truth, with depth, and with absolute respect for every person whose life became a headline. I'll see you on the next one.